All right, everybody. So for all those here in the live stream right now, welcome. We are doing our best, but this is kind of a hot mess. So, sorry for being late, but now Joe and I are going to record the interstitial bits for an upcoming episode. We just figured out our theme, and I'm just gonna dive into the intro just like I normally would.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of. You're listening to episode 312. Our theme this week is a peek at Chessie. I'm your host Ryan, and joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science is Joe Bat Winnis.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Joe. Joe, what is special about tonight?
We are, in the immortal words of guy I'm forgetting. Wow, that really ruins the bit. Anyway, we're doing it live. We're live on YouTube.
Oh, Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly, that guy, yeah. The guy who's killed every famous person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Famous sexual harasser and death historian. Bill
Yes. Exactly.
Sam, if it hadn't taken us a half hour to figure out how to just add Joe to the stream, we could have added you too, but right now we've got Sam in the live stream. Hopefully some other folks will join as we go merrily along. But Joe,
Yes.
you really put it together for this one. So why don't you tell us who we're talking to on the show this week?
Okay, today, this week, we are talking to Kristina Gaddy. She's a freelance writer and a historian. And she recently wrote an article in Shore Monthly about Chessie, the mystical monster of the Chesapeake Bay. So we had a chat with her to talk about her article and about Chessie because we like cryptids here on Science Sort of.
We sure do. Well, Joe, I appreciate you setting up the interview, and I believe I made you introduce Kristina when we actually started chatting with her. So let's just go ahead and jump to that now.
All right, our guest today is a freelance writer and historian whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun, Atlas Obscura, and Shore Monthly, Kristina Gaddy. And she has recently written an article about Chessie, the potential sea monster that lives in the Chesapeake Bay. We've got a thing for sea monsters here. So welcome, Kristina.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of cryptids and have been since I was a kid, but Chessie was a new one to me. I'd never actually heard of this monster. So can you kind of tell us the story of Chessie?
Yeah, and so it's funny because I think I knew vaguely of Chessie in a kind of pop culture way, but it was the editor of Shore Monthly who asked me to write about it. She was basically like, hey, I think you'd think this was fun. Or I think her actual thing was, how do you feel about cryptozoology? You know, do you want to write this? I was like, yes, I absolutely want to write this. That
so you
really
were
exciting.
A fan of cryptozoology before writing this?
Yeah, because I had written a small thing on Mothman.
Yes. We've never done a Mothman show, but maybe you'll have to come back for if we're going to make this a series of cool cryptids from the Appalachian and Atlantic seaboard. Yeah, big Mothman fan here.
Yeah, Mothman, and then also some Sasquatch, Bigfoot stuff in Western Maryland, West Virginia. And so when I was doing that, I was like, oh yeah, this is actually really fun to write about, because as a nonfiction writer, you know, you're sticking to facts, but with this, it's like you have facts that are they facts? You know, like, is this real? So it's kind of, it's a fun genre to play with of, okay, here's what this guy said he saw, but how do we know if that's real or not? Yeah. So Sarah brought it to me and I was like, absolutely. I want to write about this. And the first thing I did was go and look and see if there were, like, what the newspaper accounts were of just weird stuff in the water in the Chesapeake Bay, because the Chessie moniker didn't come until the 1980s. But of course, like, there's been weird stuff spotted in the bay probably for way longer than I the first one I could find was like 1846. When this captain said that he saw something near Virginia Beach. But, you know, I'm just assuming that people going back from when Maryland was, you know, first colonized, that people saw weird things in the water. And I actually have no idea about even native traditions and like if there's something creepy in the water in native traditions, you know, from around the Chesapeake Bay. But yeah, so there's lots of accounts of just like, I don't know, I saw something weird in the water. I don't know what it was.
But it's interesting because a lot of them all kind of align with seeing something long and skinny, similar to Nessie, right? Somehow all these accounts end up sort of describing a similar thing.
Yeah, usually it's like a small head that's football shaped, and then a long body that's anywhere from like 12 to 40 feet long. I think a lot of them were like 20 to 25 feet, but there's been ones that are 12 feet, ones that are 40 feet. And but the one thing that is weird is that even though those descriptions are all very similar, is that some people observe it going kind of up and down like you would imagine Nessie swimming. And then some people have described it as swimming like a snake.
Right, and that's a key difference between the way mammals swim in the water and the way reptiles swim in the water. So reptiles swim with an undulating side-to-side motion, unless it's something like a turtle that doesn't have that spinal flexibility, and then they're just using their flippers as paddles, versus something like a mammal, you know, dolphins, otters, things like that. They undulate up and down along their spine, and that is a very key but consistent difference in the aquatic locomotor habits of those types of animals.
Interesting.
Joe, were you familiar with Chessie growing up?
I don't think so. I must have been familiar with it at some point because I recognized it when I saw the article. I recognized it as being a thing, so I must have heard it at some point along the way. Maybe just in conversations about cryptids with you at some point.
But I didn't know about it, so...
Oh, okay. Well, then that wasn't it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then I guess I must have heard it at some point growing up.
No, this article was definitely
Maryland
the first
area.
I'd heard of it. Lake monsters, I thought Nessie was cool, but I was never into the American lake monsters like Champy and those. For whatever reason, those just seemed... Maybe it was because Scotland felt like this further away, more mystical place. And I also, like, on my list of... Even I think when I was a kid and like I was really fascinated by these things, I always felt like Nessie was low on the probability scale relative to things like Sasquatch. Like an undiscovered giant ape, while unlikely, seems less unlikely than a surviving plesiosaur living in a freshwater lake in Scotland, or a surviving population of plesiosaurs existing secretly for 65 million years since the KPG extinction.
But Scotland is farther away, so it's more likely than Lake Michigan or something.
Right, and like the Loch, and one of the things, Kristina, that you point out in your article, like Loch Ness is much deeper. The water quality, I guess the water quality in both these bodies of water isn't great in terms of visibility and clarity. But the fact that the Chesapeake Bay is much shallower does make it, you know, it's like, well, where's it going to hide when you're not seeing it? And also, these animals are always described as the types of animals that would need to come up for air.
Yes.
And the population density around Chesapeake Bay has got to be orders of magnitude higher than the population density around a place like Loch Ness.
Oh, definitely.
So if they're constantly coming up for air and we're still never seeing them, I mean, I guess it gets a little foggy. But again, I imagine like the Scottish Highlands having like more fog, and, you know, just everything about the Scottish Highlands feels like a place where it would be more likely this thing could hide, as opposed to a place like the Chesapeake Bay, where you pointed out the Chesapeake Bay is at its deepest about 175 feet, but that deep area is really just a channel that kind of cuts down the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, and it's the extinct or the old non-flooded part of the Susquehanna River. Most of Chesapeake Bay is like 6 feet deep, maybe.
Is it that shallow?
Yeah, most of Chesapeake Bay is really, really shallow. So the reason it can serve as a shipping lane is because we can use the old river channel.
And that's one of the reasons why Annapolis was like abandoned as the port, was because it wasn't deep enough for ships to get in. So it had to go. That's why Baltimore became a city, that has the inner harbor is much deeper. So the big ships can come in there.
Gotcha. I probably learned that at some point in elementary or middle school.
So what are the kinds of sightings when you went back and actually looked at the primary literature? Like, what were the sightings? What was being cited, I guess?
So yeah, for a long time, it was just, again, like seeing something in the water. And in 1936, there was a spotting of something strange by a military helicopter, but that was way far north in the bay. But it's interesting because that same year, a big shark gets pulled out of the Chesapeake Bay.
To me, the surprising thing is that we had military helicopters in 1936.
I keyed in on that too.
Oh, Joe, you know so much more about military helicopters and aviation. That's got to be right, though, right?
Oh, no, we did. We had them. They were just
Okay.
like real rudimentary.
I can't imagine that you'd be in the military helicopter saying anything other than, holy crap, can you believe we're in this thing called a helicopter? Like, who at that time is taking the time to, like, look around and see what's going on in the bay? Like, why aren't you just constantly being like, ah, what is this thing? When can we land?
We're definitely going to die. Yeah. They were pretty sketchy back then.
I bet.
But yeah, and most of them, though, like people will say they see something and it's like, oh, well, it was a sea turtle or it was a shark or it was a manatee, which are all animals that should not be in the Chesapeake Bay normally because of the salinity.
Because
But-
it's brackish.
Yeah, it's brackish and just not, like not salty enough for a turtle, a shark, even, a manatee. Well, I think the manatee is more about the temperature. Or a seal. One of them that was spotted was a seal. And you can kind of see with some of those, it's like a seal, kind of football-shaped head. Again, like a mammal, it's got to come up for air and then go back down.
Maybe
I
a
don't
seal
know.
that just happens to pop up next to a log or something.
Yeah, there you go.
One of the explanations I've heard for Nessie in Loch Ness is when you have freshwater otters, they'll swim in a straight line with each other. And so you'll see if you didn't have a clear view of it or didn't know what you were seeing, you would see this undulating up and down shape all moving seemingly in sequence. And it's a string of individuals, serpentine-esque weasel animals that if you didn't know any better, you might think was a single individual animal undulating up and down out of the water. So
That's very interesting.
that's an explanation I've heard. I guess one of the questions I have, Kristina, when you were doing the research for this article, do you get the sense that it seems like all these sightings are given earnestly, but there's enough discrepancy in between the individual sightings? Is there like an agreed upon, other than just using the Nessie imagery of what a lake monster is, basically this sort of modern plesiosaur thing? It doesn't sound like Chessie is as consistently described as some of these other lake monsters.
I think that that's also the confusion is that people say Chessie taken from Nessie and assume that it's the plesiosaur looking thing. But then all of the descriptions are of something that's more snake-like, if you will, like just one long body without any flippers or, anything sticking off of this long body. But I guess people are like, well, that could be the head and the neck and the back, and like there's still something underwater. But I think it's kind of agreed upon that it's more of a snake-like creature.
I liked the oarfish explanation as maybe a what it could be.
Yeah, that was, again, this was like me trying to be like, okay, so wait, if we're assuming it doesn't exist, like what are the facts, here? And that oarfish look like a log, really long, but they live below 600 feet, which is way deeper than the Chesapeake Bay. But if they're sick or I guess if they're sick or injured, they might come up to higher depths. And I think there's like just maybe one photo of one that some sailors found that's like on a beach, and you're like, oh yeah, well that would look like these descriptions because it's like a tree trunk width, a small tree or a medium-sized tree perhaps, and really long.
Right.
And like something that you would definitely think that's a monster because you just wouldn't see something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Wikipedia page for the oarfish has that picture of the sailors holding a 23-foot long oarfish.
It is an insane looking animal for sure, and definitely like even actual scientific drawings of oarfish, you're like, well, that looks like it should be on a map that says "Here be dragons."
Right.
But yeah, it would have to be a pretty unexpected set of circumstances that would lead to a giant oarfish winding up in a place like the Chesapeake Bay. I totally agree with you on that. Kristina, do you get the sense that is there a group of people that are taking the idea of Chessie seriously, or is it kind of just a fun, folky mythology that region gets to play around with?
Well, there's definitely people who take it seriously. So one of them is Robert Frew, who got the video of Chessie.
And have you seen the video? I looked around a little bit, but it didn't seem like it was available online.
Well, no, I haven't seen... Wait, no, I did see it. I can't remember where I saw... There's definitely stills of it where it's been manipulated with the colors to kind of try to bring it out. But yeah, it aired on WJZ, which is like the CBS affiliate in Baltimore. And no, I've seen it because I've seen it moving. And it looks like a log floating in the water, but it's going against the current. Mm. So you're like, well, is it, if it was just that, if it was just the log, like, and the water moving around it, you'd be like, okay, well, that's obviously just a log sitting in the water, but then it disappears.
Oh, it dives?
It vanishes from view. And you're like, okay, well, that makes it weird, because if it's a log in the water, it's a log in the water and it's going to stay there. But the fact that you can't see it at some point is like, okay, that's weird. That's what makes the video like of Chessie rather than
a log.
Unless it was a log and it was pulled underwater by a different sea monster that we haven't even heard of yet. I'm going to call her Bessie.
But it also kind of looks like a weird wave cresting where like the water would be a little bit darker, and then kind of like as the wave kind of sinks back down, that would cause it to look like it was disappearing. And it was at 7:30 at night. So if you're like, okay, maybe there was some weird like sunset thing going on that caused just like
shadows off the waves or something.
Yeah, it's like, well, maybe that's possible, but.
And so there has been an attempt to do some sort of scientific analysis of Chessie. So even though I haven't seen the video, you point out that some actual scientists or science-minded people at Johns Hopkins have looked at it and tried to do some analysis on their end, right?
Yeah, so experts both from the Smithsonian Institution Museum of Natural History and the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab looked at this video, and I think they messed with it a little bit, like to, did something technical with it to maybe make sure that it wasn't a fake.
Zoom and enhance.
Yeah, zoom and enhance. There you go. That's
Rotate.
Science, right?
Yep.
But they said that it was quote unquote animate, but undefinable. So that it was actually something moving.
Huh.
And then, quote, a definitely serpentine form emerged from the blurry tape. So it's got that snake-like thing, but it's also interesting because when you, Ryan, mentioned the like otters that could be swimming in a row that might look like something, that made me think, oh yeah, well, that would be animate.
It lines up with that definition.
Yeah, and serpentine, but like you can't, because it's grainier and it's far away, you wouldn't actually be able to see what it was.
The mystery continues.
And since it's multiple things, it's maybe hard to identify, or it makes it look extra weird.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. When I was in college, my roommate and I lived a little distance, but not incredibly far from one of the beaches in town. I went to school in Santa Cruz, and one night we decided to go down to the beach at night, and we were just running around being idiots, and we came across an elephant seal. And neither of us had thought to bring a flashlight, and we could not tell and there was not enough moonlight or starlight to tell if this thing was dead or sleeping, because they smell bad either way. and so like ever since then, I think about when things are sighted and the conditions aren't perfect for the sighting, how easy it can be to misinterpret things, because we really could not tell, even being, if it was alive but asleep, we were incredibly too close to it. I mean, we almost ran into it when we were out running around before we saw it and dove out of the way. And so like, it taught me a lot about how your adrenaline and your emotional state and just the lighting and not having a good flashlight available, like all those things can make a giant it was dead. We eventually figured out, and we could go back in the morning and check, a giant dead sea lion or elephant seal, given the right circumstances, can seem like a monster that is washed up on the beach, when really it's just a dead animal that floated away from Año Nuevo, up north. So, yeah.
Pretty similar to the circumstances under which I saw a ghost at Harper's Ferry.
You saw a ghost at Harper's Ferry?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Was it the ghost of John Brown?
I don't know. We were on the C&O Canal towpath. I was doing a bike ride from Cumberland back to Georgetown, and it was evening. We were down on the towpath. We were waiting for like the last of a couple riders to show up, and this dude's like walking down the towpath towards us, and so we wave, and then he just like disappears into the woods. He like just makes a hard right into the woods, except the woods there is just straight down into the Potomac River. And it's like, what just happened? This guy just turned and walked off the towpath into the river. And we walked over, and there's nobody there.
Oh.
I'm gonna claim it was John Brown.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, definitely.
He was hung or hanged. No, he was
Hanged.
My wife always corrects me on this, and I never remember because I know she'll correct me if I get it wrong. Hanged.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw the ghost of John Brown.
I just found an article called "Ghostly Things Are Happening in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia." Joe.
Oh, see, I'm not alone.
All right. We've never taken Science Sort of on a ghost tour, Joe.
Oh, that sounds fun.
That does sound fun, doesn't it? Next time you're in town, maybe me, you, and Abe and Bev can go on a ghost tour somewhere.
Yeah, let's do it.
So back to Chessie. Back to the thing sorry, Kristina, welcome to the show. This is how it goes.
Lots of tangents.
Lots of tangents. You also kind of tossed in a Godzilla explanation here, that maybe there's some radioactive water that was mutating some of the local flora and fauna that could be partly responsible for Chessie.
I mean, I couldn't help it, especially with the latest. I mean, obviously that was original Godzilla, that's the premise, but like made much stronger in this latest reboot Godzilla. And so, yeah, the Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plants are right there at Calvert Cliffs, which I know you guys have been to.
Yep.
They went online in the mid 1970s. And I mean, right, like, are they spewing something into the water that's causing a mutant animal to appear? I mean, I'd get in trouble for even suggesting that, because that can't be fact checked. But I did think it's interesting that the power plant makes that, the water around there is warmer because they're cooling.
Yeah, that part was interesting. So like there is this, hopefully the power plants aren't doing anything that's actually contaminating the water, but just the fact that the water being pumped into the bay is warmer than it ought to be is maybe part of the explanation why you can get larger than average snakes or the occasional manatee or things like that. That wouldn't happen if the water was its normal unaltered temperature. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, because the one of the theories is that there's somehow like green anacondas that were abandoned on on ships in Baltimore. And to be fair, there was a lot of travel in Baltimore from ships that were coming from South America and Central America and the Caribbean, and that they would have somehow like either had an anaconda to eat vermin, which seems like better to just have a cat. Like I think a cat would do that job fine, or that they somehow stowed away on these ships and then
that's possible.
Got into the Chesapeake Bay. But of course the Chesapeake Bay is way too cold for them to have survived all of these years. So it's like, well, that that also doesn't seem likely.
Yeah.
Snakes stowing away on airplanes is certainly a problem.
Yeah.
So I could see certainly stowing away on a ship. Often they stow away in the landing gear bays of airplanes. And then when they open the landing gear or drop the landing gear, when they come into land, dead frozen snakes fall out.
I mean, but anacondas don't really do well outside of the water. Like, they're so heavy that they actually kind of almost need to be in the water just for weight, buoyancy.
Buoyancy.
Yeah. One of the things I appreciated that you pointed out, Kristina, is that there was a peak of sightings right around the 60s, 70s, and 80s when there was a renewed interest in cryptozoology, probably because of just all the UFO sightings that were happening around them. But that's also when you have things like Mothman, the Patterson Gimlin footage. Is that, I might be getting one of their names wrong, but the fake footage of Sasquatch in Northern California, and also the movie Jaws came out. And so you speculate, and I think this is actually a pretty reasonable speculation, or you don't speculate, you refer to Dr. Eric Chisholm from Chesapeake College talking about how the pop cultural zeitgeist tends to precede sightings of certain kinds of cryptic animals.
Yeah, exactly. And he sees it as like this really interesting confluence of factors. So you have like that cryptozoology, like actually thing happening. You have like Jaws, which I guess kind of falls into, I don't know, is Jaws supposed to be a normal size shark or an extra large shark?
It's an extra large shark.
Extra large shark, because as Quint says, I've seen one hold two barrels down, but never three.
So that being part of it, and then also just the environmental situation at the time, that there were, the Chesapeake Bay has always been
people were more willing to believe it because of the pollution problems at the time, and that like Cuyahoga's on fire in Ohio, and so what are the odds we have a monster in our bay, sort of thing.
Yeah, like the blue crab population was really dwindling. So, I mean, I remember even probably like in the 90s, even still today, sometimes when you go to a place and get crabs, they're not from the Chesapeake Bay, but that's usually a seasonal thing. Usually if it's Chesapeake Bay, blue crab season, then you can get them. But those having to be imported, or just like you couldn't eat the oysters out of the bay anymore, which was crazy because for just so long there were oyster shops all over Baltimore, and you could just go get raw oysters, fried oysters, like, up until the 30s, 40s probably. And then all of a sudden you have these things that you don't have anymore. And it's like, well, it's pollution. It's, things are getting weird down there. We wouldn't be surprised if there was a monster down there too that's from all of this.
And I also imagine that when people start paying more attention, so like when reports are coming out that, hey, the blue crab population's not doing well, or the oyster population's not doing well, or pollution is an issue, people who maybe lived near the bay but weren't looking at it in that way, like weren't even just looking at it that often, maybe started looking at it more critically, and then maybe they saw an otter and like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before in the bay. And it wasn't because there's a monster in there, it's because before they were aware of the problem, they just weren't paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something I always think about with cryptids. Like, and you mentioned the movie Jaws, and there is, at least in the UFO community, there's a strong correlation between movies about aliens coming out and an increase in UFO sightings. So like, that's where I get this idea that like once the concept is put in your head, once you're thinking about aliens, maybe you're just looking up at the night sky more. And then if you see a micrometeorite burn up in the atmosphere, you're gonna think that's a UFO if you're not a person who looks up at the sky often enough to know what a micrometeorite is supposed to look like,
Yeah, and that's also this a point that various people have made about the Chessie sightings, is that like the 1982 videotape that airs on TV spurs a bunch of other sightings.
Because people are going to go out and look, and then anything weird that they see, they're going to be like, oh, I saw Chessie.
Exactly. And then they have this idea of like, oh, what they're looking for. So there's definitely people who say like, okay, well, you put the video on TV like that, then it's just going to happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, you're sort of priming people to see something no matter what they go out there and see.
Yes.
So do you have a preferred theory? Do you have a favorite idea of what Chessie may or may not be? Are you a believer? You can be a believer. That's okay. We're not going to kick you off the call.
I mean, I feel better about believing in Chessie because I hardly ever swim or boat in the Chesapeake Bay. And, there's something about a sea monster that doesn't seem very threatening. It's just
it's got the word
just floating along, eating its, it hasn't attacked anybody, right? So it's
That's
just
true.
it's just floating along. Whereas you have Mothman or,
oh yeah, you can't trust a Mothman.
That seems really scary that you're going to be alone. Especially if you're driving through Western Maryland or West Virginia, you're going to be out on a road and all of a sudden a winged creature with red eyes is going to land on your car. That's terrifying.
Or just
I don't want to believe it.
Yeah, the sightings of Mothman where it's a person's a woman's in their kitchen washing the dishes and she looks up out the window and sees just the red eye staring at her.
Yeah.
One of my biggest fears is looking up at a window at night and seeing anything, let alone glowing red eyes from a giant Mothman creature. Who, Joe, I know what you're thinking, but his wings were actually more like the wings of a bat. You just can't call it Batman because that's just going to confuse people.
Right. Isn't the theory that Mothman is an owl? Is that the theory?
How dare you, Joe?
Never mind.
No,
sorry,
yeah,
Mothman's real.
Yes.
We'll save that for the Mothman episode.
Probably a barn owl with some eye shine happening, but yeah, that's also the case for the Braxton County Monster. But I think the Braxton County Monster, it's not a barn owl, it's a barred owl, I think, based on the research that I've done, which I did do the Skeptoid episode on Braxton County Monster, so I have done some research on that one. Well, only because Dunning had already done Mothman, but can't have them all. Okay, so Kristina, you're kind of comfortably happy with the idea that there's a Chessie out there, and one of the things that the community around the Chesapeake Bay area has done, which I think is really fun, is they're using Chessie to promote conservation of the waters.
Yeah, exactly. So the Fish and Wildlife Service had a coloring book that had Chessie as conservation, mascot. And then I think it's also interesting that the manatee that kept showing up, there was a manatee that showed up multiple times in the Chesapeake Bay, and they gave that animal the nickname Chessie. And they were tracking it, keeping an eye on it, trying to figure out why it was there. So I thought, that was cute too, that he found a little nickname in Chessie, even though he wasn't a monster. He was just a cute manatee.
If the waters keep getting warmer, and spoiler warning, they will, to the point where seagrass starts growing in the area, I wouldn't be surprised if we started getting stable manatee populations this far north.
Yeah, totally.
Are they good with the brackish water?
I actually think that I am not a Serenian expert like my advisor is, so I'm going to tread very, very lightly. But depending on the species of Serenian, which is the group of animals that contains both the manatees and the dugongs, there is some variation in relative saltwater, freshwater tolerance within that group.
Gotcha.
But the other thing is I didn't include this in here because there haven't been any Chessie sightings other than pop culture related in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. But, the Inner Harbor is extremely polluted to the point where if you fall in, you need to immediately go to the hospital.
Really? Is it that bad?
Yes, it's that bad.
All
it's
right.
Your skin will start shedding and you need to even...
Well, I have a new theory on what Chessie is. It's just a dude who fell in the harbor and then floated out to Chesapeake Bay and mutated monster freak. Creature from the Black Lagoon
or maybe just a snake that escaped from the aquarium.
The National Aquarium, no less.
Yeah, and turned into a monster.
It's a fine
That's a good new theory. It's a good new theory we have.
It sounds like a
But yeah, so there is a lot of conservation effort going on though in trying to make the Inner Harbor. Basically their motto is "in it to swim it." That by Oh, is it 2020? I can't remember the year. 2020 seems very close now.
That's coming up.
Like, that's not going to happen. But, just to make it at least not toxic, clean it up a bit. So maybe they need to get Chessie as a spokesperson for that by saying that it's a mutated person that's fallen in.
So I'm usually, I usually am a person who prefers to live in reality and bring other people along with me. But if it takes a highly disputed, probably not real cryptid to get people to conserve their waterways, then I think I can get behind that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, I think in lieu of drinking water from the Chesapeake Bay or Baltimore Harbor, we should drink something that's been a little bit better sterilized, and we will tell everyone what that is in our next segment, which is What Are We Drinking?
Sounds good.
Be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't also tell you about what we are drinking. So Kristina, as our guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I have an RAR Country Ride Pale Ale. And the reason that I chose this is because RAR features a little Chessie on every single one of their cans. And it's definitely the Loch Ness monster version with its little head sticking above the water and a big body below the water. And they are in Cambridge, Maryland, which is on the eastern shore on the Delmarva Peninsula on the Choptank River. So they're very proud of their Chesapeake Bay heritage with the little Chessie on there.
Yeah, and their beer is pretty widely distributed throughout DC, but I don't actually think I've featured any of their stuff on the podcast before, so that's great.
Their website has a little animated Chessie bouncing up and down at
I've
the
always
bottom.
called it RAR Brewing. I guess
I think it's RAR, but I actually am not sure about that.
No, it's fine. I mean, yeah, but whether it's RAR or RAR, I think they make really good stuff. I've always enjoyed the beers that I've had from them. How's the one you're having now, Kristina?
It's very good. It's a great pale ale. So it's not an IPA, so it's not super hoppy, but it's nice and dry. And yeah, it's good.
Awesome. And there's multiple breweries in the area that do like Chessie themed stuff, right? It's not just RAR?
Yeah, so I was actually looking to see when I went to the store today if the local place by me had Union Craft Brewing named their barley wine ale Chessie. And I actually have never had that. So I can't say whether it's good or not. Barley wine ale sounds interesting for sure. But they named that Chessie in honor of, I guess, what should probably be Maryland's state cryptid.
Oh, I don't even know if any states have state cryptids, but that's a great idea. And I feel like we could push for that. I think that could be a very fun local legislative push that most states could have some fun with. And then, of course, most of them would just be stuck with like their version of Sasquatch. It would be like the cardinal of state cryptids. Well, a barley wine, barley wine's going to have enough alcohol in it that if you can get your hands on one, you can age it and then you can just save it for the next time you come on the show.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea. There you go.
Well, Joe, what about you? What are you kicking back today?
So I went to the soda shop, the Rocket Fizz, and I grabbed what I think would be what was the closest I could find to being appropriate, which is a King Kong cola. So it goes along with our discussion of Godzilla and such pseudo cryptid. But I think it's just going to be a regular cola beverage with a giant picture of King Kong on the front.
That sounds pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
Wise.
Yeah. It tastes like Coke ish. It's a cola.
Well, there you
but
go.
It's pretty good. Rocket Fizz. Nothing too special.
I went with a beer from a brewery that sounds like it should be a cryptid, but is actually not. And I'll give you guys a hint, and we'll see if you can guess the brewery. The brewery is named after the animal that literally today, became Pennsylvania's official state amphibian.
I'm not up on Pennsylvania news, I guess.
I'm also not up on amphibian breweries.
Well, it's a very large amphibian. I think it is the largest of this particular group of amphibians, or at least in North America.
Salamander.
It is a type of salamander.
Oh, is it the Wait. Oh, I know the salamander. And I cannot remember its name.
Its name is a combination of a place you can spend your afterlife and a character from Futurama.
Oh, what is it?
Sometimes known as the snot otter.
Because they have.
It is the Hellbender.
Right? Yes.
Yep.
Is that a thing?
Yes.
Yes. Because they have at Hellbender Burritos.
Yep.
They have a picture of one on the wall.
There you go. I didn't want to give you that hint. I thought that would be too obvious since we already talked about Hellbender Burritos before we started recording.
No, but I can't. If I was like, oh yeah, it's that salamander that they have there that it's named after. But then I couldn't. I don't know. Couldn't put two and two together.
So the Eastern Hellbender here in DC, this is within the district, but it is. You could probably throw a baseball into Maryland from where this brewery is. It's Hellbender Brewing Company, and their logo is Tread Softly, Travel Lightly, and this beer that I'm having right now is their Grampus Smoked Nut Brown Ale, which is a brown ale that has been smoked and had nuts added to it. And they give a portion of their profits or they say that they're dedicated to raising awareness of the Hellbender salamander, its habitat, and the environment in an effort to help bring this unique animal back into our neighboring rivers. So I thought that was a cool thing to feature since it's an animal called snot otter and Hellbender. Sounds like it should be a cryptic animal that doesn't actually exist, but Hellbenders are quite real, and they're a really amazing amphibian, and I would love for them to be more widely known and better conserved for all the peoples of Eastern North America to enjoy.
Cool.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that's one of those where it's like, if you found a Hellbender in a river and you didn't know what it was, you would
think it was
that you
a larval Chessie. It's like, this is the larval stage of Chessie, and it'll pupate into the adult Chessie and move out into the bay.
Exactly.
Like salmon. They're born in rivers, and then they move out to sea, and then come back to lay their eggs. Lay their Chessie eggs. Sweet. Well, now that we're all just kind of hanging out, kicking back, and having a beer, Kristina, can you tell us some of the other types of stuff that you write about and any cool upcoming projects that you would like our listeners to be aware of?
Yeah, so I mostly write about history, which is why I immediately wanted to find the historical Chessie accounts. So yeah, basically anything I think that is cool that has happened in history that I don't think people know about and I think they should know about is what I write about. And I'm lucky enough that Shore Monthly especially will just let me write about cool things that are Maryland, Eastern Shore history. Because growing up like outside DC, I didn't really feel like Maryland was a place. I was just like, oh, it's just whatever, suburbs. And as I've gotten older, I've been like, oh yeah, Maryland does have all of these cool things. So when I can write something about weird, interesting Maryland history. That makes me happy. And then I have a book that's coming out next year, which has nothing to do with cryptids or science at all, really.
That's okay. We tacked a whole sort of on the end of the name of our show, so we can talk about whatever we please. So hip us to the book.
Good out.
Yeah, so it's about a group of young people in Cologne during the Third Reich who did not want to be Nazis and decided that they would not be Nazis and resist. So they started by like wearing weird clothes and singing songs they weren't supposed to sing and not being in the Hitler Youth. And then as they get older and they realize that they're going to have to be a part of the war machine, they start like beating up Hitler Youth, painting graffiti, making flyers, and they're like constantly getting arrested by the Gestapo and put in prisons. And I follow 3 people specifically in this book, and they all are in jail and are arrested at some point. But the ones who become the most radicalized get into this group that starts connecting with people who've escaped from concentration camps and forced labor and people who are living underground. And they come up with this plot that they're going to start getting weapons to blow up the Gestapo building. And I don't think it's a spoiler alert because it's history and it actually happened.
Right. This is all nonfiction. This is all nonfiction, so you could go look it up. But the Gestapo find out that that's going to happen and do a massive arrest at that point. And none of the characters that I follow are sentenced to death, but their friends are. And so they're executed. A group of people are executed in the fall of 1944 to kind of put an end to the most radical group of these young people. And then it is kind of, the sad part is that after the war, they're really forgotten because a lot of people are like, oh, they're just bad kids, rather than seeing them as real resistance. So I'm hoping to bring their story into the world. Which is awesome. And you do say on your website that your writing explores and highlights forgotten and marginalized histories. And so this seems to be very much in keeping with your kind of overall themes for the stuff you tend to write about.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were really bad kids. And I don't know if I can say bad on a podcast, but they were bad kids. And I think it's really sad that more people don't know about them, especially today where we have so many cool young people doing really, great activism, and they're getting some of the same criticisms that these kids got of like, you're just a kid, or the way that you're going about this isn't how you should be going about this.
You're saying there are parallels today to what happened when the Nazis were a problem? I don't know if I can buy that. That just cries quietly for an hour. Okay. So that book is coming out next year. It is not yet available for pre-order, but if people want to keep track of the things you're working on or be made aware of when your book and other works are available, what's the best way? You have a website, KristinaGaddy.com, which we'll link to in the show notes for this episode, but are there any other things people should be aware of if they want to track down your work online?
Probably my Instagram is the best, which is @KGADZ. And that's where I post a lot of articles that I have that come out or stuff I'm working on, and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, cool. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for joining us and telling us about Chessie and some of the other stuff you're working on. This was a really fun conversation, and we're over 300 episodes in, but the show did kind of begin with more of a focus on the weirder side of some of these scientific unknowns about the world. So it was fun to get to live in that world a little bit again with you talking about Chessie.
Well, thank you, Ryan and Joe, for inviting me to be on.
Absolutely. It was great catching up.
Yeah, welcome back anytime.
All right, well, that was our interview with Kristina Gaddy. Thanks again to Kristina for coming to join us on the show. I think it was a pretty fun conversation that we had there.
Yeah, it was about time, Joe, that you brought a fun, interesting person to the podcast.
I try to do my part.
And this one time you succeeded.
As I imposter syndromed my way onto this show and continue to imposter syndrome my way along being a co-host on it. So
as you usurp the Jacob.
Giving it a shot. Yeah, exactly. I'm just proto-Jacob, and I'll always be proto-Jacob. Nope, not proto-Jacob.
No, proto means first. You'd be Deutero
that's
Jacob.
wrong. It doesn't sound good.
Yeah, you're the second Jacob. Deutero Jacob.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all right.
I mean, we're deuterostomes as organisms. We're not protostomes.
Deuterostomes?
Yeah, we are.
Explain. Because we came second?
No, because when we are forming embryonically, embryos, you either form your mouth hole, your protostome, your first hole first, or you form your butthole first.
Oh, I've heard that. Yeah.
So all invertebrates except for echinoderms are protostomes. So all arthropods, cnidarians, mollusks, all them, they form their mouth hole first. Echinoderms, which are sea stars and sea cucumbers and sea lilies and things in the sea, the kind of spiny skinned echinoderms. Urchins are also echinoderms. They are invertebrates that form their butthole first, and we are deuterostomes. And all other early vertebrates and true vertebrates, chordates, are also deuterostomes.
Gotcha.
One of the major divisions in the tree of life. So, Joe, now that we've finished chatting with our I guess your old friend, but my new friend, Kristina, what do we do next on this here program?
Next on this program, since we did drinks with Kristina, we do that segment of the show where we don't just deal with listener feedback, we enjoy listener feedback and respond to listener feedback. And that segment of the show is called the PaleoPOW. Yeah.
The final segment of the show, you know what we do. We receive feedback from the listeners, we take it in, we digest it, and then we excavate it back out to the listener for their renewed sustenance and enjoyment. So
we excavate it back out?
Excrete it, I guess, would be the actual appropriate term, but that sounds...
I don't love that either.
Worse.
Yeah, yep. I mean, considering how old some of these end up being, maybe excavate is the right word.
There's been significant decay, is what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
Okay, so since we are theoretically, in some sense, doing this live in front of a studio online audience, we thought it would be a little self-serving and a little boring for you all to watch us fumble through a patron thesis. Those are a segment of the show we really enjoy doing for our patrons, but this recording is also being co-done as a patron hangout, so it seemed a little silly to do a patron thesis live in front of the patrons when that tends to be a pretty slow segment of the show where I actually end up editing around a lot of dead air.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do that. So instead of fumbling through trying to figure out a patron thesis, we thought we would just read a message from someone who was happy with their patron thesis. So I have a message from Tommy M. Tommy was given the patron thesis in episode 301, which is the first episode of our AGU coverage from last year, where Abe and I interviewed James Baylog about his new movie, Earth, Air, Water, Fire, and very Anthropocene-centric sort of interview. And so for Tommy, the thesis we came up with was freeloading in the plant world, anthropogenic, carbon surplus pushes vegetation to the extremes. Are we heading from Anthropocene to a new Plantocene?
I love how long they end up being.
They have to be. Otherwise, I mean, I feel like people
Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I feel like people would feel shortchanged if they were short, and I don't want to do that. So That's why they end up being overly verbose. But Tommy was apparently happy with that and sent a message saying, thanks for the thesis. Hey, y'all. I just wanted to write and say thanks for the BSSO on the last episode. You guys nailed it with the thesis title. I'll run the project idea past my potential advisors. Hopefully they don't immediately write me off afterwards. In all seriousness, you guys touched on a few themes I am interested in exploring for my thesis, but for now, I'll just say that I, for one, welcome our new plant overlords. I'm Kent Brockman. Anyways, I added the I'm Kent Brockman. He didn't add that, but I added it so that Tommy, when he listens to this, would know that I got the joke, because it's important to me for people to know that I get jokes.
Right.
Joe knows that about me. Anyways, thanks again, and I think y'all are doing a fantastic job with the show. I'm glad I can help out in a small way, and I look forward to each new episode. Sincerely, Tommy. Well, Tommy,
Thanks, Tommy.
I sincerely appreciate that message. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm glad that people enjoy all the work we put into those theses.
Do you like doing them, or is it they're more fun than the themes for the episodes?
They're so much more fun than
Why
the themes.
Are the themes so
are
terrible?
by far the worst.
Why did we do that
know.
to ourselves?
I mean, that goes back well before my time on the show.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned, on Technically Speaking, we always just recorded the episode and then came up with the theme based on something we talked about.
No, that's the more modern way to do a podcast. I think we started doing the podcast before that was a thing.
Oh, yeah, that could be. Yeah.
All right.
Sam's trying to join.
Sam may or may not be trying to join us from the live stream. This would be an unprecedented mid-podcast, not interruption, but mid-podcast edition.
Guest
From Sam.
Spontaneous guest.
But
Sam joined.
Sam joined. Where's Sam? I don't see Sam.
It says Sam joined in the corner of the thing.
Oh, shoot, it does. But how do I... Sam. Oh, this is amazing. Hang on. I gotta add. Sam, can you hear us? Say something.
Sam's just shouting into the void in his apartment.
Yeah. Sam's microphone looks like it's just fully peaked right now all the time. Sam, I can see your smiling face, but I can't hear you. Are you sure you've enabled a microphone? Oh, this is terrifying. This is becoming a weird creepypasta with Sam's like smiling, overly close-up face. And we couldn't ever get him to leave. Sam, what are you doing? I want to be able to hear you, man. I can hear myself coming through Joe's headphones because his headphones have bleed.
Sorry.
They're
so big and they still have bleed.
Do we need to get you new headphones, Joe?
I don't know. This is just a gaming headset. It's not supposed to be for audio recording.
Well, do we need to get you a pair for audio recording?
I mean, I don't know if you're offering.
I would rather get you equipment that works properly. Sam, we can't hear you.
I can't see Sam.
Look on the stage 10 screen.
Yeah. It just says Sam joined. Have you admitted him?
Yeah, I tried to add him.
Can you hear me now?
Whoa, there he is.
Sam, I failed to hit a button. That was me. That was all me, man.
Hi, Sam.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. You actually did put on clothes because you put on your Science Sort of shirt.
Nice.
I did.
That's pretty hilarious. Were you actually not wearing a shirt, or did you just change shirts?
I was not wearing a shirt.
Apparently, there's a giant pink button that I needed to hit to actually like push your addition to the feed to the live stream.
Oh, thanks.
How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well.
Joe, meet Sam. Sam, meet Joe.
Hi, Sam. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
Well, Sam, introduce yourself to people listening because you're part of the show now.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam.
Hi, Sam.
I'm a listener. I am a patron.
Well, Sam, Joe was just about to read a question from a person who wrote in, and I think it's a question you can actually answer as well. And it's something that I think other co-hosts on the show have talked about before, so it's really cool to have two new people on to talk about this particular question. So, Joe, take it away.
All right, so I have an email from Richard M. So, Richard writes, PaleoPOWs, I need some assistance and advice. I'm about to start transitioning out of the United States Navy and now actually have to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I joined saying that I used the 5 years I was in to decide what I wanted to go to college for, but I'm still mostly at a loss. I've been a fan of science sort of since before the Navy, and I've always loved sciences of all kinds. Therein lies my problem. I think I want to enter a science field, but they are all too interesting to decide on any one. I don't think I've taken a science class I didn't enjoy, whether it was cold hard math of chemistry or the excitement of plating and studying bacteria in microbiology. I've also done a fair bit of research into space-related sciences and always leave with more questions and a greater thirst for knowledge than I came in with. Ultimately, I probably just need to make a decision and get into a program and run with it and see if I like it. To make this easier, I was hoping you could explain what made you choose the disciplines that you did and how you selected what school to attend. I appreciate any and all feedback, and I apologize if I missed an episode where you've already gone through your superhero origin stories. Thanks, pals. Very respectfully, Richard M.
Is that what the VR means?
Tinkerer. Yeah.
Is that what submariners say because they don't have a lot of time because they're in a submarine?
I think a lot of people just say VR.
I've never seen that before in my life, other than virtual reality.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's what it means.
I think this is our first submariner email.
I mean, maybe.
Which is pretty cool.
Never know.
Well, at least the first identified submariner. Maybe secret submariners have been emailing us for a long time.
Right.
So, Richard, that's a great question. Thanks for your service in the Navy. Have I been in a submarine? I don't think I am. I'm a scuba diver.
You can go in a submarine in Baltimore.
But you don't get to, dive.
Well, no.
I want to be in a situation where I have to run from the back of a submarine to the front of the submarine to get it to dive faster. That's a thing, right?
I mean, you're probably not going to affect it more than...
No, if the whole crew does it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was a thing, at least in olden days.
I mean, I'm pretty sure the dive planes can react to that pretty easily these days. And the ballast.
I'm pretty sure that this was a thing of submariners having to run back and forth around the boat, because it's not a ship when it's a submarine. I know that.
Yeah, it doesn't carry other boats, unless it does, because some submarines do carry other boats.
Yeah, but then the movie Das Boot wouldn't even
boats.
make sense. It's about the world's most famous
submarines are definitely referred to as boats.
That's true.
Well, Richard, you can write back in to let us know if you ever had to run from stern to bow to make the boat dive.
I heard it was a thing they had to do to make it dive extra fast, and if they ever got stuck on the bottom, you had to jiggle it by running back and forth inside the submarine.
There's no way you could jiggle a full on, even like a small attack class sub. There's no way you could jiggle
I saw it on Top Gear.
Submarine.
They said it on Top Gear, so.
Oh, well, okay. If Jeremy Clarkson said it, then must be true. Or was this post? Was this post Clarkson?
It was Clarkson.
Okay.
In the world. Okay. Come on, the new guys are going to talk about World War II history? No, that's definitely a Clarkson May with Richard getting annoyed episode.
Yeah. That seems like a James May type of topic to go off.
Right, well, I'm saying James and Clarkson were going back and forth. And
okay, gotcha.
I think they were in the Czech Republic or something. They found a submarine abandoned or something like that.
Okay.
So, I know I've talked about my entree into science before. I'm happy to talk about it again, but I thought since I have two other scienticians with me, I'd give you guys a chance to expound on your pathway into science. So, Joe, how did you decide to become an engineer?
I wanted to be an engineer since pretty much as long as I can remember. Going back to middle school, watching the History Channel documentaries or the History Channel shows about the development of cool airplanes like the SR-71 and U-2. Watching that stuff back then basically made me want to do it as a grown-up. So I kind of focused my whole academic career on that. So for you, it was
there was never a doubt that you were just going to go engineering.
Yeah, and aerospace engineering for aircraft design.
And did you ever deviate? Did you ever take a different kind of engineering class that made you wonder, should I try a different kind of engineering?
Not really. I did the Baja SAE program in college, which got me into automotive stuff, and I've considered every once in a while going over to automotive from aerospace, just because product life cycles are shorter in automotive, much shorter. The B-52 was designed in the 50s and it's still flying and will probably fly until well into the 2040s and beyond. So airplanes are around for a lot longer.
I guess to help Rich in his journey.
Yeah.
What were the things that, what confirmation did you get along the way that you were on the right path?
It didn't stop being interesting. So I still enjoy it. I'm still an airplane geek. That hasn't changed. So it's been confirmation all along that it's been a positive feedback mechanism, let's say, right?
So you have the certainty of an engineer about your career path as an engineer.
Yeah, kind of. Maybe that's not super helpful, right? But I guess my thinking would be, is there anything... I don't know Richard doesn't say what he did on the boat, but, if you were a reactor guy or something, there's certainly plenty of jobs in nuclear engineering that
pretty
could
sure
use
he was
the
a
background
mutineer.
of I would hope not.
No, I think he was taking over the boat by force.
Yeah? Okay, well, there's probably jobs in piracy somewhere.
So what about you, Sam? You work in a sciencey health field. How did you end up getting into that?
So right now I run a substance abuse rehabilitation counseling center. and I have a master's in public health. I got my bachelor's in anthropology, and I actually commiserate with Richard a lot because I went through the same sort of process of like really liking science and not really sure what direction I wanted to go in and how I wanted to get there. Or I took a bunch of classes in university and college and just loved every single science class I took. So I actually started out in aerospace engineering. I went to Georgia Tech for aerospace.
And didn't have the confidence of Joe.
Yeah, I realized, unlike Joe, I hated math. So that turns out is incompatible with...
there's a lot of math to do in aerospace.
Yeah. So came back home to try to, figure out what I want to do. Went to the University of Maryland for biology because that seemed like the next most interesting thing. Did that for a bit and then got tired of studying algae and bacteria. I took an anthropology class and got super interested in it. And then after that, I guess I fell into the same sort of path that Joe did, where every anthropology class I took was amazing and fascinating and so much fun. I just wanted to learn more about it. And then I realized I studied biological anthropology especially, I wanted to do forensic anthropology. And then I realized there's not that many jobs for forensic anthropologists. One of my professors was the state anthropologist for Michigan. And I realized that there's one state anthropologist for every state, and some states actually share one. And so you basically have to wait for them to retire or die to take the position.
But if they died, hell of a way to start your forensics job.
Your first job is
his first job was to figure out how the guy who had his job before died.
And then you just spend your whole career
in order to retire, you had to go and die in a really mysterious way, a super mysterious way, and only then, if they could figure out how you died, then they could take your position.
Oh, so you have to solve a
half your career,
to get the job.
Right?
You spend half your career just setting up your own death.
It turns out Sam was the murderer the whole time.
You are now the forensic anthropologist of Michigan.
The only way to become the forensic anthropologist of Michigan was to kill the forensic anthropologist of Michigan and then solve his own crime. It's very Dexter of you.
Bones.
But now I went on to study public health. I worked in global health for a long time, and looking back on my really weird circuitous route here, it seems like all higgledy-piggledy and all over the place, but I'm pretty sure I basically used bits of every single kind of detour I've taken in along the way, and so everything's been kind of useful. I helped run Engineers Without Borders at University of Minnesota for about a couple years, and my short time in Georgia Tech really helped me kind of figure out the groundwork of that and help connect with the students and help me organize their projects and things like that. And but yeah, just a lot of it is what you're interested in, what you're good at, and kind of it's going to sound corny, but kind of what sparks joy. And sometimes you might have to figure out if something sparks joy, if that's something that you want to do as a profession or as a hobby.
No, that's a good point. I think what stood out to me in Rich's email was about courses that left him with a lot of questions. Because to me, a big part of doing the work of a scientist is figuring out what questions drive you and then using those questions and the methods available in a given field to try to come up with an answer. And in my experience, in trying to come up with an answer, you end up with more questions. And when that snowball kind of starts building up, then I feel like you found where you maybe fit. For me, I started off as a physics major and then switched to biology and then tacked on earth science at the end of that. And a big part of that for me was not just that because I was interested in all those kinds of science and still am, but what made me want to actually pursue more of the earth science, biology or paleontology being kind of the intersection of biology and geology. And what made me want to pursue that was I met people like Patrick, and obviously Patrick and I are good friends because we have been doing this show for 10 years now, and that grew out of a spark of friendship in the first place. And so for me, a big part of deciding the science I wanted to do was a combination of what I was interested in, what sort of questions I liked, what sort of methods I liked using to answer those questions. Like I liked that paleontology involved a combination of going out in the field at these cool fossil sites, but also like developing live animal research. I thought that was a really cool mix. And then just like, I liked the people, they felt comfortable. They felt like the kinds of folks that I would want to hang out with, even when I wasn't at a scientific conference or in the lab. And that sort of finding that group of people that I wanted to be a part of was a big part of what made me fundamentally go with paleontology as a science. Did you guys get that too? Like, do you feel like you belong socially or personality wise? Or I often say as, you know, a member of that tribe, but I know that might be kind of loaded language.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely an engineer. I definitely fit in. It's a bunch of airplane nerds where I work, so it's good.
Sam, is there value in finding? You have anthropology training more than the other, more than Joe or I. Is there value in finding your group, finding your home base socially?
There is definitely cultures in every kind of group.
Yeah, culture's a good word for it.
And so a lot of times you'll hear people in like workplaces, like corporate workplaces, talk about fitting into the culture of organization or a business. And that's the same I think it's the same in academia. It's sort of, you might meet a bunch of people who are very like-minded, and you might work very well with that, fit in very well with that culture, or you might actually not fit in. There's a lot of places where a lot of like-minded people are all kind of type A personalities, and they kind of like clash with each other, and it's more adversarial instead of complementary. But I think the biggest thing is not necessarily to find a bunch of people who are similar to you, but more like where you fit in and where you hit it off the best with people, especially with research. A lot of my stuff I did in grad school was reaching across silos, and I did my thesis involved the engineering school, the public health school, and the business school, and trying to get people to kind of come together and coordinate a lot of their different interests into kind of one nexus. And trying to manage personalities is one part of that. So that's basically it, is trying to find, because a lot of times you'll find a group of people that you fit in with really well, but no one's the same. Or you might come in to a group of very like-minded people, and you might be able to add something of value that maybe they didn't necessarily have.
Yeah, and that's something I want to touch on further, Sam, because I really like that point. Like, other than scientists who actually study marine biology, and not even marine biology in a holistic sense, but like very specific kinds of marine biology or deep ocean stuff, like I know a handful of scientists who have spent a fair amount of time out at sea on various ships to do their research. I think not even 1% of that group has been on a submarine or been on a submersible to go and do science. So like, if you've already got the skill set that you know how to operate things underwater, I think if you lean into that and figure out like, how can I leverage the skills that I already learned by this stint in the Navy to then complement a branch of science that could use that skill set, I think that's huge. And that sounds like that's kind of what you were getting at, Sam.
No, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, I think the business term for it is transferable skills, is skills you develop in one discipline that is transferable and you can apply to other disciplines. And you see this, you hear this a lot with career coaching, where people who want to make career changes. You hear it a lot with people who have worked retail like all their lives and are trying to get into academia or trying to get into some other specialized field. And there's a lot of ways that they try to coach you on how to couch your retail experience in ways that are problem solving or customer interactions. Trying to manage people who are more or less unmanageable and getting, those are things that like a lot of people think are just kind of not really useful. But if you're in a setting where you're working with, let's say, a really grouchy advisor, and you know how to deal with high-end, retail shoppers who want the thing they want right now and they won't take no for an answer, and you can manage that interaction smoothly, and that might give you a leg up, no matter where you are. I mean, because unless you're, doing a very solitary sort of discipline, most science involves interacting with other people. And if you are good with people, then, that can give you a leg up. And, in the military especially, I find a lot of times the GI Bill and more veterans going back to school, a lot of times there'll be situations where you're in a classroom and then the guy who has the military experience has some really interesting insight based on his time in the military and his experience with the organization of military and logistics or whatever. So that could be something that applies to Rich as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, along the lines of what both you were saying, is definitely if there's something that you enjoyed doing in the Navy, I would definitely consider looking into where you might be able to continue that type of work in the sciences or in engineering, just because it'll give you that leg up. And certainly, if you did enjoy it, the defense industry does love to hire veterans.
Don't you put that on him, Joe. He's going to be a pure
saying,
ivory tower academic.
Just saying.
Come to our side, Richard. Join us.
Veterans also get the preference with the U.S. government with hiring.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Anything through the USA Jobs portal, you'll get a leg up.
Yeah, so even if he goes into a pure science background, if he wants to work for the EPA or some government...
EPA, USGS, Department of Energy,
exactly.
Or even going right back to like
preference.
NavSea or NavAir, right?
And I guess the last thing I would say is one of the ways that I actually got into the discipline I got into was when I had a course that I really liked. I just went up to that professor and said, hey, do you have space in your lab and projects that you want help with that I could, use to get my foot in the door and get experience? And so like, it really can be that simple. It really can be walking up to, if you really like a professor, you like their approach to the material, you like the way they taught the class, and you think that personality-wise you're going to get on, then just go ask them if they have space for you in their lab at that time. You may end up just doing grunt work on a graduate student's project, but it'll get your foot in the door. It'll, if you don't end up loving working in that lab or the funding for whatever project runs out, if the professor likes you, they can always suggest another professor that they know has a grant that they can hire you on. And so it'll get you in the system and start ping-ponging you around to various labs around campus where you might find that perfect fit, or you might just rule out a bunch of options. You're like, okay, I didn't love that. I didn't love that. I didn't love that. And I found that to be more valuable than the actual courses that involved a lab component when I was an undergrad, as far as figuring out what I really wanted to do. So,
yeah. And to that end, I'll be honest, I don't know exactly how the GI Bill works, but I know that it certainly helps with paying for college. So, put it to work. Take some classes that you that sound interesting and see what really piques your interest. And to that end, there was the second half of the question was how you selected what school to attend. So I went to Ohio State, and
Ohio State.
I went to Ohio State, also known as the Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University. Amazing.
Yes. You can say just Ohio State. That is acceptable. You don't have to say the Ohio State.
You are the only person from that university system I've ever met.
No, I mean, if you're going to say, don't say Ohio State University. It's the Ohio State University. But you can say just Ohio State. Does that make sense?
I'm just going to say that university in Columbus.
That's fine, whatever. Anyway, one of the nice things about going to a big school like Ohio State is the fact that there's everything to study, right? So a big school like that, a big state school is going to have, classes in literally everything there is to have classes in. Versus, if you go with a smaller school, there's your selection might be limited as to what they offer. So maybe start looking at the bigger state schools or just bigger schools in general to give yourself that opportunity to study anything that you might want to switch over to if you change your mind and want to study something different after taking a couple classes.
What about you, Sam?
I went to whatever school took me. So
bingo. Got it in one. That was my situation exactly as well. I applied to a handful of schools. I got into University of California, Santa Cruz, which happened to be one of my top picks, and getting into a UC out of state was actually kind of tough. And the biggest thing I remember about that experience, which I think applies to Richard's question here, is I felt like a lot of the students that I was there at that university with, they were, by and large Californians. When I went to UCSC, it was 5% out-of-state students. It's probably less now, if I had to guess. I felt like a lot of the students there from other parts of California, UCSC was not their first choice, where it was mine. And so they were there because they maybe didn't get into the UC of choice for them. And they kind of had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder about like, oh, well, I'm at the UC I didn't really want to go to. Whereas for me, I'm like, I'm at this place where I have the opportunity for world-class education to a degree of which I've never had the opportunity to experience before. So I feel like it's the sort of thing where if you come in with the right attitude, a university that might feel like it's the safety school for one person can be the perfect fit for you. And so I just would say, don't worry about what other students' opinion of that university is. Like, if you feel it's the right spot for you and it's got the resources and the departments and the professors that you need to get where you want to go, just embrace it and take advantage of it and like love living in it, because being at that stage of a college experience, I think, is so much fun and nothing really compares. So, yeah.
And don't freak out about like, it's not a quote good school. That's not a thing.
You literally need one good professor. If you want to become a scientist at a college or university, all you need is one professor in your corner who will help you get some lab experience and help you get a good letter of recommendation to get into grad school, and you're smooth sailing. Like, obviously it's a lot of work, but I think that's the key.
Yeah, one thing I've heard, I don't have any personal experience with this, but one thing that I've heard with academia is the school can matter, but a lot of times, especially in graduate school, it's the professor that you want or the advisor that you want is more important than the school. And so a lot of times when I was doing my thesis, doing my literature review for that, I kept coming across the same names over and over and over again, and they were doing like really interesting research. And that's kind of what you want to do, is kind of look through the literature and read kind of what you're interested in. And if you keep seeing a name or a couple names pop up over and over again, and they're doing the stuff that you're really interested in, it doesn't matter what school they go to, because what you want is you want to learn with them, right? Sometimes it's better to go to they might be in a school in the middle of nowhere just because they like it or their family's there or
that's whatever. Where they got offered a job.
Exactly. And it might be better to go there and be with that person if that's what you want to study than to be with go to like Harvard with people who don't really have that and try to pigeonhole you into some other their pet project that you don't have an interest in. That might be something that or Rich wants to consider.
So I feel like for me, by the time you get to a level of research where you could get a PhD in it, you're probably looking at a field of people that has maybe 1,000 active members. And I'm talking like the very tip of the branch, like the most specific kind of research within that field you can imagine, maybe 1,000 people. And odds are, if you're working at a university, even if Joe's typing really loudly, you can go up to your...
we got a new listener.
You can go up to your professor and say, hey, professor, I am strongly considering going to grad school for this. Who do you know that... Oh, hey, Jen, we're talking about grad school. Well, not that you would know anything about that, right? Jen is also a professor and has been through all of this with us. So what I was saying is, by the time you reach that level of specificity, you can probably just go to the person whose lab you've been working in and saying, hey, I'm strongly considering going to grad school for this topic. Can you give me a list of half a dozen people to reach out to that are producing good work and are looking for students? Like, because odds are the social circle of that one professor is large enough to get the ball rolling. And even if you don't hit within that first 6 people, those 6 people might suggest another, like, oh, I don't have any money for grad students right now, but so-and-so does, so you should email them. And once you start that thread of just like emailing people, expressing an interest, showing that you're serious about the subject, I find that you kind of just plinko yourself into a situation that likely will work itself out. And so you just kind of rely on that plinko game to get you to a final destination, and then once you're there, you just put in the work and get it done.
Yeah, it's interesting if you talk. This is my experience, but if you talk to other people, I've heard the same thing. Where it's funny because you say that the plinko game is when you're in the process of trying to figure out the path. It's like you have a path in mind, and then it may work, it might not work, whatever. But then after you're done with it, when you look back, like the path seems like it worked or it's right or whatever, even if at the time it was just all random and everything was crazy. And I've heard people say that over and over again. It was just like they took a circuitous route and it wasn't what they were planning, but it worked out in the end. And it is kind of like a plinko set where it just kind of takes you wherever, and that's just kind of, you just have to embrace it.
I agree with Sam agreeing with me.
Just put me back on standby.
Joe, you did great for an engineer.
Thanks, buddy. Oh, just qualify the crap out of that.
Well, the craft took off. What more can I tell you? Well, I think that answers Rich's question. Was there anything else, Joe, in that email?
I think, and then some. We wandered into choosing a grad school. I think we're still working on undergrad here, but I think we're good. We're all superheroes, and we told our origin stories.
No, Joe, I think we handled the undergrad, because the undergrad is literally like, where did you get in? Go, make the best of it.
Yeah. As long as it's not like Michigan.
Yeah, Charlie hates Michigan, apparently.
See? As well she should.
Well, she's a West Virginia dog. She knows. She knows the WVU has a long tainted relationship with Michigan. Don't even bring up Pittsburgh. Let's not go there. She couldn't handle it.
So yeah, I think we answered Richard's questions.
No, that was all we had planned for the PaleoPOW segment for this week. Sam, as a patron, do you have any questions for us? We've given you your thesis, right? Did we do okay?
Yeah, it was about the werewolves burning Europa.
A public health issue.
Yep.
We know you're into public health and hot sauce.
Yeah. I can't think of any questions right now. I'm still working through the backlog. I think I've gotten to... What was your latest episode that you posted?
310. I'm editing 311 today.
I listened to the one about the rewilding predators.
Yeah, that was 310.
Okay. All right.
Jesse.
So I'm caught back up.
Cool. What other podcasts do you listen to?
Common Descent podcast.
I've been on that.
Yes, and you introduced me to that, actually, and I've been loving that.
The system works.
Sawbones, you also introduced me to Sawbones.
Another West Virginia podcast, straight out of Huntington.
This podcast will kill you, and I'm trying to think. I listened to Extra Credits and Extra History, and they just created a podcast out of Extra History, so I'm looking forward to checking that out.
Cool. Well, thank you for being a patron.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for being my friend, IRL.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And a charity case.
Wow.
And oh no, we lost Sam. He's kicked off the feed.
You still have to drink my awful
I know.
fire water.
Okay, listen. Abe's getting married soon. It's been very tough to schedule Abe's time. I want to have that one with Abe because it's spicy, and Abe's a spice boy.
I don't know how well it's going to do aging. I actually have some. I should probably try it out.
I've kept mine out of the light. So for people listening at home, Sam gave me a bottle of, is it habanero? No, it's ghost pepper, right?
No, it's Carolina Reaper.
Carolina Reaper, so even hotter than ghost pepper. So it's Carolina Reaper mead. I almost had mead on the show tonight, but then there was a mix-up there. And I've been saving it only because I would have to record in person with Abe, and we did the last hangout with Abe, and so for people who missed that hangout, we had Abe start creating his D&D character. Sam, did you hear that one?
No, what do you roll?
Abe is going to be a rogue dragonborn. He's going to be a giant, fire-breathing, sneaky boy.
Did you name him after like a Icelandic volcano?
He did name himself after an Icelandic volcano. You got it in one.
Fantastic.
So I will let Abe talk about that more on the show later because I don't think he's had a chance to finish building out that character. But it sounds like that character's drink of choice will be your fire mead. So we just need to get Abe married, and then once he's married, maybe his schedule will clear up a little bit more, and we can get him back on the show to have that drink. So
and play some D&D on the show.
Play some D&D. You gonna DM us, Joe?
Sure.
All right, Sam. What character are you bringing to the SSO D&D?
All right, I'll roll a random character.
No, you got to decide.
A dwarf bard.
Dwarf bard.
Dwarf bard.
Finally, a bard that can take a beating. Okay, so
To be a stand-up comic.
With that, thank you both for joining me, and thank you to everyone who joined us in the live stream, Jen and Sonia in particular, because they were the ones actually chatting with us. And this was an experiment. I would say it went okay. But we will keep trying. So we will see you for the July Patron Hangout. Not sure when that is scheduled or what the theme of that will be, but we will also see you for the next episode of this podcast, which will be episode 312. No, this is episode 312. It'll be episode 313. Regardless of what the numerical assignment of that episode is, there's one thing I can guarantee you, and it's that you'll get a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Sam, I didn't even have to prep you. You just knew.
Crushed it.
You just knew.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Sam, are you making fun of my headphones? Is that what's happening right now?
That or the hat, probably.
Joe, get your phone off of the desk. I can hear it, but I can feel it buzzing.
You can feel it buzzing? I'm sorry.
Yes, I can. How dare you? I'm recording now as well. Are you recording,
Excellent.
Joe?
Yes.
Okay. Listen up, Sam. We ain't got time. We ain't got time for you to make fun of us. Our feelings are too sensitive. Joe.
Mine aren't too sensitive. I'm an engineer. I could take it.
Engineer and the life scientist.
Yeah.
Typical.